Episode of The Real Story. The 2023 legislative session is just days away. Joining us are the leaders of our state's General Assembly, both Senate and House, speaking on their priorities as they head back to the Capitol. Stay with us for this inside look with our lawmakers. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. Empty chambers will soon be full as the 2023 legislative session gavels in Wednesday. Joining me now is Speaker of the House, Democratic Representative Matt Ritter, and House Minority Leader, Republican Representative Vincent Candelora. Thank you both so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Of course. Well, the new legislative session starts in just a few days, as we said. So how are each of you feeling about heading back to the Capitol this week? Vincent, we can start with you and then we'll head over to Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm looking forward to sort of getting us back to normal. We've had, an entire session battling COVID and being virtual. And so we're going to, transition back to being in person again and trying to get that process back to the way it was prior to COVID. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody.
Absolutely. That sounds nice. Matt.
Yeah, and there's a lot of new members, they just got elected on both sides of the aisle. And so it's always exciting for people for their first opening day. They bring their families, their kids. And again, we did it 2 years ago outside. It was pretty cold. It was not fun getting sworn in out there. And it was probably 20 degrees out there. So just to get back to the normal routine of the legislature, I think we're all looking forward to.
Fantastic. Absolutely. And you actually mentioned election there, which leads me into my first question. We saw historic voter turnout this year for elections. You were, both out on the campaign trails talking to voters and constituents. So from both what you heard, what do you think are their priorities for this general session? Matt, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Vincent.
Yeah, I think one of the messages that resonated well in our elections was the things that we've done with our budget, right? The reforms that we've made to get us from where we were in 2010 when I first got elected to where we are today. A full rainy day fund, $500 million plus of tax cuts, but doing it and still prepaying our pension liabilities. So, and that was done in a 2017 bipartisan historic agreement, and that has really stood the test of time. The other thing that I heard is people are excited about early voting and figuring that out. I mean, you saw the constitutional amendment passed pretty easily. Again, we'd love to do that in a bipartisan way so our towns don't feel like we're making them do things they're not comfortable doing, but having a couple weeks of early voting like other states is going to make a big difference for people.
Yeah, I think we saw a very status quo election. Most incumbents got reelected. And I think that one of the concerns that's cropping up, obviously, is energy cost as well, trying to address inflation. So how do we continue to provide relief to our residents, both in the short term and the long term? So I think, tackling our energy crisis is going to be a big issue this session as well.
And speaking of incumbents, Governor Lamont was reelected for another term. We have another year with the Lamont administration. Would you label this past session as productive? And do you anticipate this session to be as well? Vincent, we can start with you and then go to Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this session will be interesting. I think the dynamics are going to change a little bit. I'm excited to hear the governor talking about trying to reduce the income tax, which was something that was important for Republicans. So looking at sort of systemic tax reform to the extent we can do it, I think is a good dialogue to have. And I'm hopeful that the bipartisan conversation continues.
Yeah, I think we're excited to hear what the governor has to say on opening day. But if you look at his results and the number of towns that he won, I think it shows you that people generally viewed him as a nice person, a leader who is able to work, I think, with both sides of the aisle. But also, we didn't sacrifice my kids, right, or Vinny's kids for today's political gains. We did a lot, but we also said we have to think about tomorrow. I feel like when I got in, everybody thought about themselves in that 2-year cycle. And I want us to be predictable for businesses, predictable for families. If that means lowering costs, dealing with inflation, we do it, but we do it in a way that is sustainable, because this, for tax policy, isn't good for anybody.
Well, we've already talked a lot and mentioned inflation a few times already in just a couple minutes. It's a big deal for everyone. Everyone's feeling the effects. Are there any proposals or discussions happening for this session you think would help constituents? Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think you look at reducing taxes to help with inflation, right? So whether it's the earned income tax credit, which is at historic levels, right? If you work and you earn, you get a larger tax credit. If you look at what we might do in the income tax, or people might look at different sales tax ideas. I think the bottom line is, can you make things more affordable for people through your tax structure? And we'll look at that. But also, we did a lot. Not only did we cut taxes, the gas tax and the child tax credits we did last year, the aid we've delivered to our municipalities, our cities where the tax burden is the highest and the most regressive, has also been a really big deal. And so people didn't see huge tax increases the way they might otherwise have. So there's a lot of ways you can target spending to target inflation beyond just tax cuts. So we'll look at it a holistic way. ECS funding, all those things will be in play.
And Vincent, what about you? Obviously, inflation is an issue we're all talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with those points. I'd also say that, government has benefited from inflation because as prices go up, they're collecting more sales tax. So I think we need to take a look at that. The 1% additional tax that we have on restaurants, maybe we look to reduce that back to the normal sales tax rate because all the menu items have increased. So is there a way to sort of equalize inflation with taxation? And I think that's also part of the conversation we need to have.
And one thing I would add on the budget that we both agree on, and I think I'm going to make this point on Wednesday, is that we have covenants in place that have allowed for us to deposit surplus income tax revenues into our rainy day fund and to prepay liabilities. Those expire. I don't want to talk about a budget, and I don't think he wants to talk about a budget, or the governor wants to talk about a budget until those are back in place. And if that upsets people who might be on the fringes of the parties, I don't care. You get that in place, then you tackle the biennium budget.
Well, another issue that we've heard people talking about across the state is crime, a rise during the COVID-19 pandemic across the board, but especially with violent crime in particular. There are lots of new laws coming into effect today trying to tackle these issues. We have the creation of the Hate Crimes Investigative Unit. We have the criminal records erasure and more. Where do you see these measures headed in the next session? I know some lawmakers I spoke to said they want to watch and see how these play out. And is there any more that needs to be done in these areas, Vincent?
Yeah, I think that we have made some incremental changes to our laws, especially when it comes to motor vehicle theft. I think we have to continue to take a look at that and see what we're starting to hear from the communities that deal with domestic violence is how do we protect against people who are repeat offenders. They may have a violent record, they have a restraining order. When do we make sure that they're not back out in the street so they might offend again and create some kind of violent act? So I think we've got to be careful with those reforms. Bail reform, we need to keep an eye on. I'm concerned that that might get rolled back. We've seen that in other states like New York. So really preserving what we have and possibly expanding upon it to make people safer is going to be an important issue.
Absolutely, Matt.
I try to counsel my caucus. Sometimes in the Democratic Party, we start with this conversation by citing statistics, and it is true. Connecticut, compared to its other states, is a very safe state. The problem when you do that is if you have been the victim of a crime or someone in your family has, it rings as tone deaf. So I never like to lead with that. I would say that I think some of the campaign rhetoric, I think most people saw through it as a little extreme, perhaps overselling how much crime there really is in Connecticut. But if you are a victim, if it happens to you, we take that very seriously. So here's what our laws have to do. Our laws have to make sure that criminals who commit really serious crimes are punished. And there are people who need to be put in prison. There's no denying that. But at the same time, you can't take a 14-year-old kid, or you can't take someone who's done 5 years in prison and done their sentence and then write off the rest of their lives. Because you know what they'll do? They'll go right back to committing crimes. So when we talk about erasing criminal records for misdemeanors, that's really, really important so people have access to a job. They have access to housing. And so a lot of states have gone in that direction, red and blue. And so there's a way to do both. There's a way to make sure you address the most violent offenders and the most heinous crimes and that people are punished for those, but also let people re-enter society with a chance. Even, I don't care, if you give someone no opportunities, they have no choices often and they'll commit crimes again.
So we hit on inflation, we hit on crime. I want to give each of you a chance to touch on other legislation or legislative priorities you'd like to see brought to the chambers this session. So Vincent, we'll start with you.
Well, and I think to that point of juvenile crime, I think one thing we have to look at is the Victim Compensation Fund and making sure that people that are a victim of juvenile crime, that they have the ability to access that. Right now, I think under our current laws, it's only there for adult crimes. So I think that's an important measure that we might want to take a look at. And bottom line, I think as Speaker Ritter pointed out, probably the most important thing is maintaining all of those fiscal structures in place, the revenue cap, the volatility cap. Those are going to be important priorities in our caucus as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one that we didn't talk about that I'd like to add is, I think we've talked about this a little bit, is I want to do something. Last year we did a really historic mental health bill for children, which got a lot of national attention, as it should. The people who worked on that did a great job. We can do more for our community with people with intellectual and physical disabilities. We have waiting lists out there. We have a lack of housing. We have a lack of opportunities. And I chaired public health 7 years ago, and I remember these stories. The problem is the state had no money. We didn't have the resources to address it. So I think one of the bills you'll see focused and prioritized in the House is a bill to look at that, to look at our students who have autism, to look at supplementing services for people. I think that'll have a lot of bipartisan support, and I know he and I are going to sit down with Senate leadership and really go through that bill. I would love to do that, 151 to nothing, like we did the mental health bill last year.
Right. Well, just a couple days until the session kicks off, but you all stay busy at the Capitol through June, but a lot of people might not really know what's going on. It takes a while for those new bills and measures to work their way through, and sometimes people don't know what went on until new laws go into effect. So how do you think people can stay updated and involved in this process, and why should they? We'll start with you, Matt.
I tell members, read the newspaper. I tell students, and people roll their eyes. They don't know what, people don't do that very often. Watch the news, right? Read a newspaper. I'm not saying them because on your program. We do have really good coverage, and you do really report stories. But if you don't do that and you only rely on social media, you're not getting it. So that's my best advice. Read the newspaper or watch your evening news, and you'll learn a lot about what's going on at the state capitol.
Yeah, absolutely. Get off of Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah.
And I would also add,
you sound like grumpy fathers and Luddites, but it's true.
But I would also go to the CGA website, the cga.ct.gov, which has a whole list of items. If you go under the commission reports, you could see our new laws that are taken in place. You could track committees, what bills are being raised, when the public hearings are happening. And it's really has a plethora of information for people to stay informed.
And you can Google who your state rep or state senator is. They all have emails, and most people will respond to you. Yep. I know we do. So if you email me and you live in my district, you're going to get a response. I got 10 emails today, right? So people do check that stuff. So ask questions. Ask your legislator, what are you working on? Or I have an idea, I have a bill. You'll probably get a response from somebody most times.
Absolutely. Those are the highlights. Reach out. Stay off of social media for your news. But we both, thank you both so much for being here again. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Wish we could talk longer. But like I said, thank you so much for being here. We still have a lot to get to on this show. Next, we'll speak with the Senate leaders, what their perspectives and priorities are heading into this legislative session, coming up next on this special episode of The Real Story. Stick with us.